Snow was falling like tiny diamonds from a velvet sky. The streets of New York shimmered with holiday lights, every window glowing warm and golden. Laughter echoed from nearby houses, and the distant sound of carolers filled the air. It was Christmas Eve, a night of love, joy, and togetherness for most people. But not for Richard Hale. Inside his massive mansion at the end of Willow Street, the world felt silent, empty, and cold, despite the grand fireplace that burned in the corner. The crackling fire threw shadows across the marble floor, reflecting off portraits of a man who once smiled but hadn't in years. Richard sat alone in a high-back leather chair, a half-finished glass of brandy in his hand. His expensive suit was pressed perfectly, but his heart was wrinkled with regret. Outside, the city celebrated. Inside, he stared at the flames, wondering when his life had stopped feeling alive. Once upon a time, Christmas had meant something. He remembered decorating a tiny tree with his mother, the smell of cinnamon cookies, and her voice whispering, "The best gifts are the ones that come from the heart." But that was long ago, before money became his only measure of success. Now, he had everything: cars, art, a business empire, yet not one person to share the night with. His phone had buzzed earlier with hundreds of holiday messages from employees, partners, and strangers, all automated, all empty. He didn't bother replying. The grandfather clock struck 11:45. Outside, the snow thickened, wrapping the world in white silence. Then, a faint sound broke through it, footsteps. Soft, hurried, crunching through the snow. Richard frowned and turned toward the window. Through the frosty glass, he saw a small figure at the gate, someone moving near his mailbox. The light from the street lamp revealed a girl, maybe 8 or 9, wearing a thin pink coat that barely covered her knees. She was reaching into the mailbox with trembling hands. "What on earth?" he murmured, setting down his glass. For the first time in years, something stirred inside him, curiosity, maybe even concern. He stood, walked to the door, and stepped out into the cold night. Snowflakes brushed his hair as he whispered to himself, who would be out here, on Christmas night? The wind whispered through the trees as Richard stepped down the stone steps of his mansion, the cold air biting at his face. The night was still except for the soft crunch of his footsteps and the faint jingle of Christmas bells drifting from somewhere far away. The little girl hadn't noticed him yet. She stood on her tiptoes, her small fingers trembling as she reached into the tall mailbox. The flickering streetlight cast a halo over her tangled hair, and Richard could see her breath coming out in tiny white clouds. He cleared his throat gently. "Hey there, sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" The girl gasped, spinning around. Her big brown eyes widened with fear. She took a step back, clutching a torn mitten to her chest. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered. "I wasn't stealing. I was looking for something." Richard softened his tone. "Looking for what?" She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "A letter. A letter," he repeated, confused. "From who?" Her eyes flickered toward the mailbox. "From my mom," she said quietly. "She told me, if I ever felt lonely, to come here. She used to work in this house a long time ago." Richard froze. His mind raced back through the years. He remembered her mother, Maggie. A kind woman with tired eyes but the warmest smile. She'd been one of his housekeepers before she fell ill. He hadn't thought about her in years. The little girl looked down at the snow. "Mom said, Santa might leave a message here. Or, maybe something from her. I just wanted to check, before Christmas was over." Something inside Richard broke. The air suddenly felt heavier, the world quieter. He knelt down so he could see her face. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lila," she whispered. He noticed her thin clothes, her reddened hands, the worn shoes soaked through from the snow. She couldn't have been out there long, yet she looked frozen to the bone. Richard swallowed hard. "Lila, your mom, she was a good woman." Lila nodded, her voice trembling. "She said people are good inside, even when they forget to show it." Richard felt tears sting his eyes. In that moment, he knew, this child hadn't come searching for a letter. She'd come searching for hope. For a long moment, they just stood there, a billionaire in a tailored coat and a little girl in torn mittens, both framed by falling snow and the faint glow of Christmas lights. Richard's throat tightened. He had faced business empires, boardrooms, and negotiations worth millions, but this tiny girl with tearful eyes, made him feel powerless. He took a gentle breath. "Lila," he said softly, "it's too cold for you to be out here." Why don't you come inside for a little while? She shook her head quickly. I can't, sir. Mom said not to bother rich people. She said they don't like surprises. A sad smile tugged at Richard's lips. Well, he said, bending down so their eyes met, tonight, I think a surprise might be exactly what I need. Lila hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her mitten. The wind howled softly, sweeping snow across the driveway. Richard could see her lips trembling, not from fear, but from the cold. Please, he said gently, holding out his gloved hand. It's Christmas Eve. You don't have to be alone tonight. She looked at him, really looked, searching his eyes for something. Maybe she was looking for danger, or maybe kindness. Whatever she saw made her nod slightly. Okay, she whispered. Richard smiled faintly and opened the heavy oak door. Warm light spilled out from inside, painting the snow in shades of gold. Lila stepped in cautiously, her shoes leaving tiny wet prints on the marble floor. The mansion's grand hall stretched before her, chandeliers glimmering, paintings watching silently, a Christmas tree standing forgotten in the corner with half its lights burned out. Lila stared in awe. It's like a castle, she breathed. Richard chuckled softly. It used to feel that way. But lately, it's just been a very big, very quiet house. He hung his coat on the rack and turned to her. How about some hot chocolate? Her face lit up, the first real smile he'd seen. With marshmallows. He nodded. With as many as you want. As he walked toward the kitchen, Richard felt something he hadn't in years, a quiet warmth spreading through him. For the first time in a long time, his house wasn't empty anymore. The kitchen glowed with soft golden light, the air filled with the scent of cocoa and cinnamon. The quiet hum of the fireplace in the next room mixed with the faint sound of Christmas music playing somewhere upstairs, a song Richard hadn't listened to in years. Lila sat at the counter, her small hands wrapped around a steaming mug of hot chocolate. Her cheeks were rosy now, and her eyes reflected the twinkle of the tree lights that flickered through the doorway. Richard leaned against the counter across from her, stirring his own cup, watching her sip slowly as if trying to make it last forever. So, he began gently, your mom used to work here. Lila nodded, her expression soft. Yeah, before she got sick. She said this house was the prettiest place she'd ever cleaned. She liked it because the windows were big, and the sun made the floors shine. Richard's chest tightened. He remembered Maggie, always humming while she worked, always grateful, even when she looked tired. He had never realized how much she'd loved the little things. She was a good woman, Richard said quietly. Lila smiled faintly. She was. She used to tell me stories when she came home from work. Said the man who owned this house must be very smart, because he built something huge from nothing. Richard looked down, his voice barely audible. Smart, maybe. But not very kind. Lila frowned. I think you're kind. You gave me hot chocolate. He couldn't help but chuckle, a sound that felt strange after so many years. That's all it takes, huh? She nodded seriously. Kindness doesn't have to be big. Mom said even small kindness can make cold hearts warm again. Her words hit him like a quiet bell. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just watched the little girl sipping cocoa, wrapped in one of his oversized sweaters, sitting in a kitchen that had never felt so alive. The fire crackled softly. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside, something was changing. Richard realized that somewhere between losing people and gaining wealth, he'd forgotten what Christmas was really about. And tonight, a little girl was teaching him, one small kindness at a time. Morning sunlight poured gently through the tall windows of the Hale mansion, scattering soft gold across the living room. Snow still blanketed the world outside, untouched and pure. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting a warm glow over the room where two unlikely souls had fallen asleep, a lonely billionaire and a little girl who believed in hope. Richard woke first. For a moment, he just sat there, watching Lila sleeping peacefully on the couch, wrapped in a blanket far too big for her. Her small face looked calm, safe, something he hadn't felt in his own heart for years. Something stirred deep inside him, a feeling he could barely name. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt. It was love, the simple, quiet kind he hadn't known he was still capable of feeling. He stood quietly, walked to the study, and stared at the dusty photograph on his desk, his parents on Christmas morning, long ago. His mother's words echoed in his mind. The best gifts don't come wrapped, Richard. They come from the heart. He took a deep breath and picked up the phone. "James," he said, calling his attorney, "I need some documents drawn up, today." "Yes, it's Christmas. I know. This can't wait." By the time Lila woke, the smell of pancakes filled the air. Richard was in the kitchen, wearing an apron that looked hilariously out of place on him. "Merry Christmas," he said with a smile. Lila rubbed her eyes. "You cooked." He laughed. "Don't sound so surprised." They ate together, laughing, talking, filling the house with something it hadn't heard in years: joy. When they finished, Richard handed her a small red envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Your Christmas gift," he said softly. She opened it slowly. Inside was a document with her name, a trust fund in memory of her mother, enough to take care of her future. Her eyes filled with tears. You did this for me." Richard nodded, his own voice trembling. "No, Lila. You did this for me. You reminded me what it means to have a heart." She threw her arms around him, and for the first time in a lifetime, Richard Hale cried, not out of sorrow, but gratitude. That morning, the richest man in the city finally became the happiest.